John's going to be talking about Ashaig on Skye. I'll introduce him in a minute, but we also have a second talk, which is going to be Susan Kruse, who's going to catch up on a lot of the talks that we've had throughout the last couple of weeks and pull out some quite interesting research questions from that. And again, we'll get onto that in a wee bit. But tonight, I'm going to introduce you to John MacLeod. John's lived on Skye all his life, and he's got a passionate interest in Gaelic culture and the local heritage. He's a hill walker, and he's worked as a mountain rescue volunteer. And I'm really interested to hear this talk. It's going to be John MacLeod talking about multi-period remains at Ashaig on Skye. So that's over to you, John, now. Thank you.
Okay, fiscal market dinge. Ha me tar di bisha noch agus ha me dolivrain ma yon Ashaig milria. Agus ha tar riechtin Michael Ashaig. Persoonlijk tikshif column Kurst. Hello everyone. Tonight I'm going to be talking about Ashaig. Ashaig in the Isle of Skye, known locally as Ashaig Milria in Gaelic. Ashaig lies about 4 miles from the Skye Bridge in the Crofting township of Breckish, Upper Breckish and Lower Breckish. And Ashaig lies on the common grazing of Upper Breckish. The first place being Ashaig that you come to, Ashaig Milria. In Gaelic, Ashaig Milria, an early Christian settlement. But as we shall see, it dates to times much, much earlier, thousands of years in fact, to Neolithic or even possibly Mesolithic times. Ashaig is Gaelic for ferry. A bad Ashaig, you might have heard on the news, is a ferry boat. The inference being that Mill Ruag ferried himself across from Applecross on the mainland, where he had established an early church. Applecross in Gaelic is known as a chumrich. A chumrich is a sanctuary. Okay, can we have the first slide then, Susan, please? Okay, let me put the place into some sort of context for you with the first picture. This shows the broad sweep of the moorland up the hill to the hills of the Torridonian sandstone, with the hills in the distant mainland. Torridonian sandstone is about 500 million years old, but later on, much later on, limestone was formed in a shallow sea, and that limestone then overlies the Torridonian sandstone. The next slide. And you can see almost the green area stretching from Breckish right up to Broadford, where the limestone overlies the Torridonian sandstone. Torridonian limestone is always conducive to fertile soil, and fertile land was always attractive to early people. You can see the island of Pabby there in the middle with the Applecross Hills in the distance and looking up into Loch Kishon. Next picture. And this is a picture looking north up the Inner Sound. And in this picture, looking at it carefully, there is at least 3 early Christian chapels. There's a sandy beach there, which was ideal for landing on. To the left of the picture, there's a roundhouse. To the right of the picture, there's the pulpit rock, the well, and then on the left-hand side there, towards that band of rock that runs down there, on the left-hand side of the picture, there is Lone Husper, which I will try to explain later all these things. It's a very ordinary looking landscape, but is extraordinary when you look at it more closely. Next. Next picture. Yes, this is much the same, but looking east this time towards the mainland hills. And you can see that the green grass is fairly fertile ground. And Ashaig had been cultivated for a long time because of the number of lazy beds. The whole place is covered in lazy beds, so it was well cultivated by a long time ago. But the fact that it is common grazing and used for grazing the local animals from the local crofters, it was never built on, at least not built on except for one notable exception. Okay, next slide, please. Pardon me, but it doesn't look like it, but there's a roundhouse here, or a hut circle. It's Bronze Age, and it's about 3,000 to 4,000 years old. It's very important as it shows real evidence that a sophisticated people lived here. They were settled farmers who worked the land, but they also had the advantage of good hunting and fishing. Shellfish abounds in the shore down there, and there are many of these, with quite a number in our own area. One, in fact, in our niche, which is only about less than a mile away. They're about 6 meters inside diameter, with a low wall, in a circular wall, with a cone-shaped roof. It would have held an extended family, and they probably had a pretty good life of it here because of the amount of food that was available between the sea and the land. Next picture, please. This was the place I was telling you about, Lone Chusper. This is very interesting, and it's much more modern in times, but it just shows you that it's only about 100 yards away from this a round house that we saw earlier. Lone Chusper is the hollow of the target in archery. Now, the Clan MacInnes were the hereditary bowmen to the Clan MacKinnon of Strath. They would practice their archery and hold competitions in this little hollow that you see running down there. It's probably around about the 16th, 17th or 18th century. The name is the only thing that remains, Lone Chusper. But the clan crest of the Clan MacInnes is a strong arm holding aloft a bow. They were great bowmen, and there are many stories of their prowess at archery and in warfare generally. Next picture, please. We are now in the cemetery, and these show some war graves. And at the rise at the top of the green mound there, it shows where Milroig's cell was. Could we go to the next picture, Susan, please? Well, I'll tell you about the war graves. It's a very tragic story, actually. There are 16 of these war graves in Ashaig, and it's the story of the Queen Mary, the liner, the Queen Mary, and the HMS Curaçao. In October 1942, just northwest of Ireland, with the Queen Mary heading across the Atlantic from America, with more than 10,000 soldiers heading for the Second World War. The Queen Mary collided with the Curaçao and cut her clean in two, and she sank almost immediately. 332 sailors lost their lives, but 101 survivors managed to be saved. And the bodies that were washed ashore in the Slate area and round about Skye and some of the isles to the south, there are 16 here. There are 3 in Portree Cemetery, 4 in Ashaig, and there may be some in muck or egg. The gap that you see in the stones there is where one of the sailors were exhumed and taken home. This is all part of our local history, and there is a book out called The Queen Mary and the Cruiser, which tells you the whole story and how it came about. The Queen Mary was on a zigzag course, and this zigzag course coincided with a change of watch on both ships, and an error of navigation occurred, and it was never truly properly found out just where the navigation occurred, where the error occurred, but it happened in this tragedy. We can have the next slide, please. We see more of the war graves there, but up on the top of the hill, this is where Milroy's cell was. And it's a level sort of platform where the cell is supposed to be, with the sandy beach, and beyond the sandy beach is Applecross. And then you can just make out the darker islands of Crowlin, and beyond Crowlin lies Applecross, where Milroy had his main church and where he preached from there. Okay, next slide, please. And this is another picture of the mound where the cell was. It's not very clear, but when you stand on it, there is a definite rectangular structure, and that during an excavation for a burial, a low wall, some stones of a wall were found, but I'm not sure when that was, but it's some time ago. The chapel probably had a corbelled roof, and if anybody is familiar with these corbelled roofs, you might remember there's a similar one on the really well preserved early Christian site on the Garbella Highlands in the Firth of Lorne. It's worth looking up because it's the finest, best preserved early Christian site in Scotland on Ilachanive, the Saint Island. Next picture, please. Just over the wall from the cemetery, you can see the wall of the cemetery there. There is the well, Toper Ashaig, or Toper Mill Road. And running down from the wall is where that bit of fence was put in recently, the shell mound is. We can just have the next picture, Susan. And here it is. When I was younger, there was just a large heap of stones quite high here, with an outlet at the bottom near where the hole in the wall is. But in 1994, during an archaeological survey, the heap of stones were excavated, and this was what was found. It looks as if it may have been a small building enclosing the well, possibly with a corbelled roof. From the excavations, it's clear that the well was in use for thousands of years. May well have been a healing well. A small Neolithic stone axe was found in the well. Also, some pieces of iron slag, suggesting that possibly Bronze or Iron Age were being smelted there, along with many other artifacts. Next picture, please. And that is the well there down inside that little hole there. And in Monroe's time, it was probably used as a baptismal well. The early Christians were very expert at taking important sites like this and making them even more important to the local people. Next slide, please. The stone slab that is lying just up from the space in the wall was the only bit of the well that was seen before the excavation. And there was a little ledge there, just there where you're pointing, Susan, yes, with the cursor. And that little ledge there, there were coins and shells would have been left. And even in my own time, people were leaving coins and shells in there. But later on, after the excavation, that was opened up. Next picture, please. And again, this is another view of the outline of that rock there. And there's marks in the ground that suggest there might even have been an earlier and bigger structure there, but it's not very clear. But after the excavation was done, it was realized just how important and significant the well was. So funding was found somewhere to build this really nice wall to protect it from grazing animals. And in fact, you can see a few cows there lurking in the distance. The excavation was carried out by Martin Wildgoose, who lives in Skye, and Martin has done incredible work on Skye and the local area in the mainland about excavations and finding out much about our archaeological history. And he still works doing this job, although he's retired, but still does some projects. And we're much indebted to Martin for all the work he has done over the years. Next slide, please. Okay, there's the inside the well again, and with its nice interpretation board. And just beyond the well, you can see where there's a tree down there is what they call the pulpit rock, or Liech, which is the rock of the book. The next slide, please. That's the interpretation panel there, which tells you a wee bit of a history of the well and of Ashaig roundabout and some of the finds. Okay, next slide, please. And that's a picture looking down from the cemetery itself. And in the foreground is the shell midden, which we'll speak about later. And over the well, as I said earlier, was the pulpit rock. Next slide, please. And this is where the shell midden is. The shell midden was found when they were doing this survey, but I'm not sure just how old this is. It could well be go beyond early Christian times and be much older. But a lot can be learned from these middens. But I'm not sure if this one has been excavated properly. But someone came along recently and put that fence up there, but the poor fellow didn't know about the shell midden. And we don't know whether to ask him to shift it or not, or just to leave it, because it may do even more damage. But that's the shell midden. And just beyond, just over the wall, is where St. Mulroig's cell is, or little chapel is. So maybe the shells came from Mulroig's cell. Next, please. This then is Craigileor, or the Rock of the Book, sometimes known as Pulpit Rock. And next slide, please. And it's quite a substantial overhanging rock when you stand underneath it. But this part of the rock is known as Liech Gilior, or the slab of the book. And it was from here that Mulroig would have preached the gospel to the early local peoples, probably Picts. The people standing or sitting on the other side of the burn. The overhanging rock forms a small amphitheatre, and it's remarkable how well the voice carries here. You can almost picture how these Picts would have been enraptured by this strange man with his shaved head and red cloak and his very strange story. But it must have worked, because eventually all were converted to his message. Mulroig travelled widely, even across to Easter Ross, and many of the place names are called after him, many of them anglicised, and you wouldn't know they were after Mulroig. But Loch Marie is a typical one that is named after Mulroig. Next picture, please. The tree. There is a wonderful legend that Mulroig had a bell that was hung on a nearby tree that rung of its own accord. It is best if I quote from the Reverend D.M. Lamont's account of this story in his little book, Strath and Skye. So I will read his account of the story, which I can't better. In the old days, a beautiful tree grew near this churchyard, and the story is well known that the bell that was suspended on it by St. Marie, every Lord's Day it tolled of its own accord the hour of service. It seems that Ashaig was at that time the centre of a large population, which later on somehow dwindled away. And then Killiachraw became the centre meeting place of the parish, and the old Ashaig church was left to fall in ruins. The bell was taken down from the tree by some practical modernist and hung at the new parish church. But in vain, says the legend, did the people of Strath await its blessed music. Like a newly caged bird, it would not sing. Ashamed at this, they returned it to the Ashaig tree, but the sacred spell had been broken. It never tolled again. It's a great story, and much revered and well known locally. But one day, recently, someone came and cut a whole pile of the branches off. Gosh, what a stooshy that caused. How dare they cut down our bell tree? I think it was getting too high, and it may have been impeding on the flight path of the airport runway, which you can just see up the edge of the thing there. Anyway, the tree survives and is doing well. Of course, it's not the bell tree. That was 1,700 years ago, but it's the only tree around, and it might just be related. Anyway, it's a great story, but I will tell you more of this later. Now, the next picture, please. Now this picture shows you the runway to the airstrip. And I'll just get my notes sorted out here. Here's the notes. Yeah. So the story of the bell tree and it being cut down. You can see the airstrip running away there and how close it is to the Pulpit Rock or Crickleyor. But I'm standing on the top of Milroig's Cell at the moment, looking down on Crickleyor and the bell tree. And just out of sight over the wall is the well and the shell midden. And looking down the length of the airstrip, there used to be a scheduled air service from here to Glasgow, but it was stopped some time ago. There is a new campaign to start the service again. This would require a longer runway. A plan was produced that clearly showed the runway extended all the way, almost up to the cemetery wall, right over Crickleyor and the well. This caused a great deal of concern, and we wondered what on earth we could do. It was suggested, I think it was by Susan herself, to approach Historic Environment Scotland, HES. We thought this would take a lot of effort and a long time. We wrote to them. Within 2 weeks, 2 very nice people came from HES and had a look. They agreed with our concerns, and within a very short time, we had a protective designation for the burnt mound, which we haven't seen yet, the Milroig Cell, the cemetery, the shell midden, and the well. All these sites are deemed to be of national importance. Interestingly, Crickleyor could not have this designation, as it is based on legend, and there is no physical evidence of any structure round about the Pulpit Rock there. Even an incised cross on the rock would have done the trick. This is very encouraging to anyone who seeks to protect an important site. And our thanks go to HES, Historic Environment Scotland, for helping us with this and the very prompt manner that they dealt with it. Next picture, please. Oh yes, now the burnt mound. I lost my notes. Ah yes. If we just walk a few 100 yards to the south of Crickleyor, you can find a burnt mound, almost unique to Skye, as there are only 2 to 3 others that we know of in Skye at this time. They are fairly numerous in other parts of Scotland and Ireland and elsewhere. The telltale horseshoe shape with its mound is what makes it easy to spot sometimes. In the centre of this horseshoe, a pit lined with stone slabs or wood. The pit was filled with water, which was always nearby, and stones were heated in a fire. The stones then placed in the water, which heated up quickly and would stay hot for quite a long time. Cooking for meat or shellfish would take place. And the action of the cooler water on the stones would cause the stones to crack and break. The stones were then thrown out, creating the mound. Next slide, please. No. Okay, this is the same burnt mound from a slightly different angle. There is water in a sort of drain close by. But we can just go to the next slide, please, and we can note the wee pile of stones there that's popping through the grass. And there it is. You can see how the stones have been cracked into sharp edges. They would have started off being round, glacial till possibly. The next slide, please. But the stones would have broken up with these sharp edges, which is very clear in that picture. And the whole mound would have been covered with these. And this one shows us some stones that are clearly marked with fire, where the fire had burnt the stones, leaving a red mark round about them. Okay, next slide, please. Yes, I think we can go on to the next slide now, Susan, because I've told the story of this one, the airstrip and the. Yes, this is from the burnt mound again, but looking down towards the east. And on the right of the picture is the site of the old inn. There was an old inn there, Tyos de Lusai, and it's no longer exists, but the ruins were clearly seen at one time. But the road that goes down to the airport now covers most of these old ruins, which is a pity. My grandmother used to tell me that when she was very young, she would be sent down to the Tyos to get a jar of whiskey. The jar would have been one of these earthen jars with a little handle. I think they might have had a whiskey still there. And further down to the left, there was apparently a souterrain or a cairn, possibly, but I can't find it because I think it's all sunk into the peat. Next picture, please. Well, you know when you pass a heap of stones sometimes, and you would love to know what it was all about. Well, this is the Bull's house. It dates back to the days when transport was more difficult, and the crofters would hire a bull for about 3 years. They had the responsibility then to feed and care and provide a shelter for the bull, and this is it. There's not much of it left today, but this was the Bull's house. The lower British crofters had their own Bull's house over in Ardnish, and I think many other crofting communities would have had the same thing at that time. When transport became more easily available, the train line coming to Kyle, the bull would have been renewed every year. So the Bull's house was no longer required. And so it disintegrated into the state it's in today. The next picture, please. And just about 100 yards away from the Bull's house, there's another heap of stones, but this time it's a lime kiln. And being limestone in the local bedrock, it's a valuable source of fertilizer and cement, and it can be used for a cement for building purposes. There are quite a number of these locally, and a commercial one was built in Broadford, now no longer in use. It was a circular pit with an opening at the bottom, which was filled with broken stones in layers with peat or wood in between. Fire was set and kept going for several days. When the fire was out, water was poured over the stones, and this broke the stones down into a fine powder, which was then pulled out at the bottom, and then could be used for various purposes, but mostly for fertilizing the ground. I have one of these on my own croft, and my father used to tell me that when he was a young boy, he would tend this fire, So I often wondered if I could try it out and see if it works, but I'm sure I don't have the technique. Next slide, please. This is the peninsula of Ardnish and is the common grazing of the lower Brackish people. But the Ob, the water bay that stretches for about another mile at least, way up to the left, up there into the end of Brackish. And just below the rocky outcrop that you can see over in Ardnish there is, yes, just there, Susan, no, there, first one. Next, to the left, go to the left, there, yes. There are substantial ruins there called the Totemo, the big ruins. This was the home of the farmer of Brackish. Brackish, that was in the days before it was divided up into crofts, around about 1800. The farmer was called Lachlan MacYarlich Och, Lachlan McKinnon, Lachlan, the son of young Charles. He was related to the McKinnons of chiefs of Strath, and he was a noted bard, poet, a fine fiddle player, and an excellent swordsman. The combination of all three attributes led him into some difficulties at times. He was born in 1665 and died in 1734 and is buried at Killiachraw. Killiachraw lies over between Broadford and Torrin on the Elgol Road. There's a beautiful cemetery there. The ruins include a very good example of a corn drying mill. Next picture, please. Okay, we're looking right up the inner sound, and it shows the deepest water inside the continental shelf around the UK. It's up to 1,000 feet deep in places. Submarines exercise and test their torpedoes and sonar equipment there. It is known as the British Underwater Test and Evaluation Centre, or BUTEC for short, and is run nowadays by Serco. It employs a lot of people locally, and we are assured that it is all in the nation, in the national interest, that these submarines work up there. We hardly ever see them, but there's a lot of boats operating out of Kyle. Not like the nuclear submarine that a few years ago ran aground just close to the Skye Bridge and lay there all day until the tide lifted it off. That was a close run thing. Away to the north, you can see Rona, and then the island of Raasay, a little bit of Scalpay, Pabby, and then over to the left, the Crowlin Isles. And it was in this area, way up to the far left, is like Staffin in the north end of Skye. You can come across to the mainland and away out of sight beyond where we see on the right-hand side is Gairloch. And that whole area, right down the Skye side and down the mainland side, that were surveyed by the project Scotland's First Settlers, taking several years to complete. An amazing amount of discoveries were made going back to Mesolithic times, 8,000 or 9,000 years ago, uncovering a Mesolithic, Neolithic, early Christian, Viking, medieval, right up to the Bronze Age and Iron Age, and right up to the present day. This showed that well-organized and numerous peoples occupied this landscape for thousands of years. The work still goes on. Some may have seen Karen Hardy's talk last week on the new finds dating back to 13,000 years ago in Skye. So it's really exciting stuff that all this stuff is still going on. It's an amazing landscape. and when you dig down a little bit, you find more and more. Okay, next slide, please. This again, just looking across Broadford Bay, and you can see the very small white sandy bay, the sandy beach there. Quite an exquisite little coral sand beach there, but it's a tidal island there. And interestingly, it's called Ilan Narueg, or the Island of the Red Men. And this may well refer to St. Marueg and his people who may have had red tonsures, red cloaks rather. Ilan Narueg, and our niche beyond that. Okay, next slide, please. And this is the island of Paby. And in about the center of Paby there was another early chapel that dates back to Marueg's times. And it's very difficult to find, but I believe you can make out the outline of it just about to the right of these trees there. The next slide, please. Thank you, Susan. This is a picture of the stone Neolithic axe that was found in the well at Ashaig, along with many other artifacts. But it's fascinating to see how this stone is formed with this sort of white speckled marks on it, because in the next slide, I think we will see, if we just go to the next slide, please. This stone here, it's not the same one as the previous one. This stone is another Neolithic axe head that was found in Breckish by a young lad called Ian Nicholson around about 1957. Just go to the next slide, please. This is another picture of it. And you can see it has this speckled white pattern to it. It could well have been manufactured from the same type of rock. Ian Nicholson found this on his croft when he was digging potatoes. It's around about 5,000 years old and is in the care of the Glasgow Museum's Resource Centre and is kept in a drawer. It's the sort of thing we would very much like to see back in Skye, because it's an important item and was found not at Ashaig, but just about a mile away from Ashaig. But it does show you that these people did live in this area. And the wee notch out of one corner of it there is where Ian had it on his mantelpiece at home, and it fell onto the hearth, and a wee chip broke out of it. But when a few years ago, Susan did a course in archaeology in Skye here, and I told her this story, and she says, "Oh, we'll find out where to find this stone." So she gave me the links, and my wife and I went down to Glasgow, and we went to this resource place in Glasgow, and were able to have a look at it and take a photograph of it. So that was quite a thrill to see that and actually hold it in my hand at that time. Okay, next slide, please. Right, this lovely bronze strap was found in a cemetery just at St. Marueg's cell. It dates back to about the 10th or 11th century, and it's highly decorated with early Celtic design, suggesting that the Christian settlement was in Ashaig for quite a long time. If you think that Marueg was there in the late 600s and the 700s, and this was 10th century. So it would be lovely to know just how long the early Christian settlement was there. But the clasp apparently comes from a bookend to mark a Bible, which probably would have been. And there is a suggestion that there might be some sort of Viking influence on it, because it was mentioned by the lecture we had from Simon just last week about the Viking artifacts that were found in Skye here. So I think that ends my story of Ashaig, and I could ramble on for ages about Ashaig, but I hope I've given you some idea of how a small area can hide such a wealth of riches and history. And I don't know the half of it really, but it's well worth a visit. So thank you very much for listening to this wee tale of Ashaig. And it's a wonderful little place, and definitely has a presence when you go there on a quiet day. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions now.
Thank you very much, John. That was a wonderful tour in the sunshine of the whole area. And what a picture you paint. I'm just imagining the boat pulling up and a red-cloaked man stepping out. And times like this, I want a time machine. I want to see it all with my own eyes. So we did have one question for you to begin with, from Mal Nicholson, and he says, does the well still produce water?
Oh yes, indeed. The water flows copiously. I've never known it to dry out, even in the driest weather. And you can see that the local people cut the grass on a regular basis. And we keep the cows out because the gate is always closed. We certainly encourage people to go down, visitors to go down there and have a look around the area to see it. And we're so fortunate that Hector Nicholson from Sconser built that lovely wall around it, because the cattle were doing damage there. But the water flows for sure, yes.
Okay, we've got a question from Norman Newton. It says, is there any chance of an early Christian cross at Ashaig as at Applecross? Do you think we've got a parallel one over there somewhere that's just not been found yet? That would be something, wouldn't it?
Well, I've searched around the Pulpit Rock, but I would have to pull all the moss and heather away, and I don't really want to do that. I'm surprised that an early Christian cross has not been found down at Ashaig. There was a small incised cross when they excavated the well, found on a rock there, but it's funny that there hasn't been a larger cross found, because they were very common in these early Christian sites. But it may happen yet, so we'll keep looking.
I'm hopeful. There we go. Let's keep optimistic on it. Got another question here from Nick Lindsay about the lime kiln. The kiln appears to have the same shape and form as an ordinary corn drying kiln. Is this the case?
No, the corn drying mill is quite different. The corn drying mill had a circular stone-shaped bowl. The building, just a normal sort of rectangular building, but at one end had a raised platform. And there was always a roof on the corn drying mill. And below that platform, there would have been a tunnel built of stones with a fire at the end. And the warm air would go along the tunnel and come up through this bowl-shaped chamber. This can all be seen at the one I mentioned to you at Ardnish at over Lachlan MacCarley Hawk's place. And I've seen many of these corn drying mills in various deserted villages around Skye. Almost every village had one somewhere if you can find it. But it's not the same as a lime kiln. The lime kiln would have been left to the open and was quite different, because the fire was underneath the lime and the layers of stone and then layer of burning material, and the fire would slowly burn through the lot. So they're quite two quite different things actually.
Okay, I hope that's answering your question, Nick. Get back to us if you've still got a query on that one. We've got another question from Anne here, and it's saying, well, thank you for your talk. Are you trying to get the axe head back to Skye? What are the chances of that happening, do you think?
Well, we haven't tried, but it would be lovely to have it back because the Museum of the Isles over at Armadale have a secure museum where they could easily be kept. I don't know how you go about getting something like that from museum of because they're very precious about these things. Although it was held in a drawer, in a box, and we had to jump through numerous hoops just to get to look at this thing, far less try and steal it. So, but it would be nice to have it back in Skye.
Absolutely, a local campaign showing that you all value it, I think, is definitely going to be the start for that one. So,
Yes,
another question from Alan: was there any archaeological survey done before the airfield was built?
well, not that we're aware of. The airport was built, I think, was it in 1970 or thereabouts, and they came in. It was really the army that built it as an exercise. The Royal Engineers came in and they built it as to give them some experience. And they came in with massive bulldozers and soldiers and bulldozers. I don't think they were too concerned about what they would find, but I don't think there was any that I know of any examination of the ground. But we may have lost an awful lot of stuff down there that we don't know about.
I mean, certainly we don't have any record of there having been a survey from everything that we have, and it was in the 1970s. It's before any planning requirement to do something like that. So certainly now, if they're expanding the airfield, they would have to do a study.
Yeah,
but unfortunately, as you say, it's something it will have already gone, unless there's things still surviving within the airfield that we don't know about. It's certainly under that lovely flattened strip. Who knows what we're missing? So it's now we have a few more questions before we move on to the next talk. I'll just do a couple more. So I've only got one more from Roberta Bailey. John, can you recommend any literature on the ancient history of Skye? What would be your top picks?
On the ancient history? Oh, yes. Gosh. Well, Martin Wildgoose and I think Karen Hardy have just taken out a very nice little booklet on walks around these archaeological sites. It's on sale. It's a little booklet and it's just brought out fairly recently. That's just one book, but Skye is one of these places where there are just a multitude of books written about it, and you choose your book, I suppose. But that one that Martin Wildgoose and Karen Hardy have taken out is very good, and gives you walks round all the various sites and explains everything. It's a nice wee plug for Martin's nice book. So that's one I would recommend.
Available in all good bookshops, or is it only available at certain outlets in Skye?
I think yes, it's available in bookshops, I think, locally here. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. One final question before we move on to our second talk. Again, from Nick Lindsay, did you find any datable coins from the well Tobar Ashaig?
Yes, there was quite a number of coins, quite early ones going back to Charles, was it George, something or other? I can't remember exactly. There were quite a lot of coins, and some of them quite old. In fact, some of them so old they couldn't make out the dates. But nothing like any Roman coins or anything like that, but certainly medieval coins were found. And they are all in the Dulchas in the Portree Archive Centre. That's where these things are held, including that clasp, by the way, which can be seen there in the Portree Archive Centre, it's called.
That's great. Thanks so much. Then I think we're going to wrap it up there for you then. But thank you so much for taking us on a tour around a really special place. And I hope many people watching will be able to get around there yourselves at some point and see if you can find the elusive carved stone for us, poking out the heather somewhere. But thank you, John. Just going to move on now to our second talk of the evening, which is from Susan Kruse, who most of you know, but in case you don't know, Susan's the Learning and Engagement Manager at ARCH, Archaeology for Communities in the Highlands. She's a passionate supporter of all community archaeology. For the last 2 years, she's been coordinating the Highland Regional ScARF project, which we're really glad is happening at last. So her talk tonight is going to detail the work done so far and invites you all to feedback on the outstanding gaps in our knowledge. So here's Susan on what do we need to know contributing to the Highland Regional ScARF.
Thank you, Kirsty. I won't actually be doing quite as much as you asked there. This is just sort of a little add-on to the end of John's talk, which is much more interesting to sort of look and see a wonderful site around Ashaig. I do recommend anybody going for a look around there. It's extraordinary that the finds that are there. But the Highland Regional ScARF is coming off of a national project in Society of Antiquaries of Scotland had a project that was published in 2012, which asked people to pull together a total overview of Scottish heritage and are looking at what do we know for each of the periods, what are the gaps that we have, and what are the research questions that we should then focus on. It was pretty much set out chronologically, so it went Paleolithic, Mesolithic, Neolithic, working our way right through. So there were some cross-cutting themes as well. There was the theme on, for example, science, and there's been themes on carved stone. So it's a good resource. The idea was it was in wiki format, which means basically it's on the internet, but it invited people to make comments, thinking that that would keep it up to date. Unfortunately, very few people have commented. So it's pretty much fossilized in 2012. I put it on, it has a new website now, and they are working on updating the existing website. So it's www.scarf.scot is the new one to have a look at. But at the same time as the national one was published, it was a realization that Scotland isn't a unified heritage story, that there's regions have different stories to tell. And a number of local regional ScARFs have now set up. The Argyll one is published. The Highland one, which I'll be talking a little bit about here, is underway. There's also one underway for the islands, which is covering the Western Isles, Orkney and Shetland. And also underway at the moment is Perth and Kinross. And so over the next few years, hopefully, we will have a number of these regional ScARFs that will not duplicate the national ScARF, but really to have a look and say, okay, what is the same? What do we have that is the same in national and also in the individual region, but also what is different? And within our local areas, what areas need further work and research? What are our research questions? We're also realizing, of course, that even something like Highland, there are regional differences within the Highland region. On the right is the picture of an old photograph of a clavicairn, something that is very distinctive just for the Inverness area. So it's a chance to really investigate what we have for our heritage here, going from the earliest settlers, which, as we know from Karen Hardy's, now goes to the Paleolithic, right through up to modern times. And it should produce then an overview and a number of research questions that are specific to the Highland region. This is funded by Historic Environment Scotland and overseen by the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland. So the Highland Regional ScARF started in June 2018 with a symposium where we had a number of people saying what they saw as the main themes and what they saw as the main things we needed to look at. And we also invited people to make comments at that stage. You can see here the post-its on the boards, asking people to suggest what they thought we needed to do. It was 3 years. It seemed a long time to go. Well, we're heading towards the third year now. We have decided for the Highland Regional ScARF to keep it chronological so that we can allow comparisons. So when you read the national ScARF and talk about the Mesolithic, we can then compare it to the Mesolithic and Highland and not just have to repeat everything that way. But what we're also doing is using the historic environment record to underpin all of our data. Now, we didn't see our HER slides at the beginning of this talk, but for all the other talks we've had, Ian has put on a number of slides showing the sorts of sites and ideas that are there in the historic environment record. We realized from an early time that the HER is very good for sites, but was less good for finds. And so for the last 2 years, we've been concentrating on getting information on key finds from the Highlands. And Grace Woolmer, now Woolmer White, who's in our picture right there, She was the project officer and has put a lot of this data onto the HER. So you will now see a lot of finds as well. Things like the strap end that John was showing, things like his Breckish axe. So we were trying to link some of the finds with the sites. The structure of it was, of the Highland Regional ScARF, will be two multi-period chapters, one talking about sources available to us, and one looking at land and environment, things that change right through all the different periods. And then each chronological chapter will have evidence on environmental, we'll be looking at settlements, both landscape and buildings, information about daily life for farming and fishing and gathering, information on what people are eating, information on the material culture, the finds like the Neolithic accents you can see on the top right. We'll look at religion and ritual evidence. We'll look at industry and craft evidence like the lime kiln we can see on the right-hand side there, and transport and movement, both of people and of objects. And we'll have a chapter on conflict as well, evidence of conflict. We think we can get almost all the information we want to do, focusing on material culture into this structure, but do tell us if we've missed out something. And we're at the stage now where we want feedback. The draft chapters are started to go up on the website that's listed there on the ARCH website in the Highland Regional ScARF folder. The draft chapters are there, case studies are going up, various maps that Grace has compiled on different aspects. These are all now starting to go up for consultation. I do urge everybody who has an interest in this to have a look, have a read. Not all of them are live. A number of them are waiting for feedback. I should also say these have been written during lockdown. I have still not been able to get to a library. So they're also peppered with bits that say, check this book when you can get to a library. But it's a start, and I'm looking for help. Are there any mistakes? That would be really useful to point out. You might be able to tell me what the sources are or fill in some of the gaps where I say need to find out more here. Are there key examples that we need to do? As part of this ScARF project, we have compiled a list of all the radiocarbon dates. This isn't yet up on the website, but it will be going up soon, our first draft. And this is incredibly useful because it's dating that makes it key. If you find a charcoal burning platform, it's no use unless you have the date. We need our dating evidence. What John didn't mention on Ashaig, for example, is we have metalworking from the Middle Ages. And we only know that it dates them because we have the dating. It was dated there. So a lot of information, feedback entered, requested, and also research questions, because that is the aim of ScARF, is to identify what are the questions that we need to focus on. So I thought at this stage, it might be an idea, in the way we're talking about research questions, is to think about just what we've had at the HAF conference during the last 2 weeks. This conference has always been great for focusing on a number of new work that's been done that's either answering some of the questions we had in the past, or more likely is throwing up potential research questions and ways to address them. So it gives us a nice way to round off what we've had so far. Our first talk was Kenny Brophy, and quite clearly the stone rows are a big mystery to us. What are the dates of these strange structures? We need good dating, we need environmental evidence data on this, and it is a clear research question that needs answering. Karen Hardy followed this with emphasizing the importance of looking out for the Paleolithic sites. 10, 15 years ago, we didn't even think we had Paleolithic in the Highlands. We know we do now. We need to know what these sites can tell us about the earliest settlers in the Highlands, where they came from, what they were doing here. We need to find more sites to fill in this picture. And we need to, as she pointed out, further work on the sources of tuff that is found in so many Skye sites. Then Hugo Anderson Weimark followed, giving us real insights into the reworking of carved stone balls. I now want to go out and look at every single carved stone ball from the Highlands, because were they reworked, as he's showing some of them are? Certainly further analysis is needed on this material. He also showed quite clearly the benefits of making results available in the public domain. All of his wonderful 3D representations, and these are something, this will go into, I would think, the sources chapter to show some of the potential that this can give for us for our research. Tom Addyman presented the important information on the common elite tower house castles like Fairburn Tower that we have throughout the Highlands. But he also showed the castle and its landscape and the importance of looking not just at the building itself, but where it is and what other developments happened after the castle went out of use. The same evening, Graham Cabers convinced us all on the potential LiDAR has to help with landscape studies. And at each chapter, each chronological chapter of ScARF is pointing out the need for landscape chapters. We have a number of individual buildings, but very, very few studies other than Lairg, which puts these places into their context. This was followed by a roundtable with Kirsty Cameron, Lynn McKeggie, Emily Freeman, and myself, which stemmed from my perceived need when doing this research for ScARF, that we need to have monitoring of project stages and to make this information publicly available so we know where a project is, where we have the information. And we need then also better resourcing of places where this information is publicly available, including, it highlighted clearly, resourcing needed for the Treasure Trove unit and for the local HER. Then we had Joseph Ryder from Bergen, who showed we really do need to identify the Viking settlements, given the place name evidence on Skye. And Skye has he showed very great potential to shed light on this, including a site that he flagged up as something worthy of further work on this regard. Then on Monday, I filled in for Inverness AOC, who were unable to give a talk about some of the work they've done, but I highlighted various research questions for investigating the prehistoric settlement in the Inverness area, including where are the Neolithic burials in the Southern Highlands. There's a real gap. Yeah. There's also a need for something, a site, an area like Inverness, which has so much going on in the past, a real need for the material to be brought together and pulled all the information. On Tuesday, so many research questions he had when he talked about the paleo-environmental evidence and so many possibilities. The need for landscape studies, as I say, features in every ScARF chapter. And with those is a need also to pull together lots and lots of little information that's been done on a number of different sites, but just tends to get buried. Information also needed for people who are not archaeologists. There's a lot of studies on peat, which are not, archaeologists don't use them because they don't necessarily know about them. So we need to get this information pulled together and made more available. And also need for multi-proxy studies. We're taking lots of different environmental evidence. And I think at the end of this, we agreed that the Strath of Kildonan would be a very good landscape settlement site to test a lot of this out. Then we had Becky Aiken, Alan Miller, Catherine, and Ian looking at the potential of 3D reconstructions, both not only for visitor experiences in the museum, but as Jackie quite emphasized, for the fact of using those for research, another way, another tool, if you like, that we can use when we're researching both sites and objects. Then yesterday, we had our 3 students who gave terrific presentations. Derek Barch, who showed us the potential for linking documentary evidence and physical remains of small-scale whiskey distilling, including, I think, emphasizing the fact how few of these have been excavated and the benefits we might get by focusing on the Highland one, especially now that we could compare it to an example in Murray. We had Yasmin, who showed us the potential to identify the composition of natural woodland in an area. She was looking at the flow country, but it was obviously something that could be moved around to many different places, shedding the light on what things were due to natural causes and what to human. I think we have a really good indication on how one can tell this, again, based on good dating, and especially how we can link those to archaeological sites nearby. Hannah Janders-Boyd then showed us the potential to use cores, again, the peat cores, and ones that had pollen and charcoal to try and get a more detailed picture of the occupation and subsistence of roundhouses. Roundhouses, which are so common in the Highlands, and yet not that well known. and certainly not that well known in there. So there's still a lot of research and questions about how they were used, when they were used. Work on Skye has shown that roundhouses go from the Bronze Age right through to medieval. So there's plenty more work that needs to be done on that. And then John tonight showing the potential for further investigation at Ashaig, a site that was so important through millennia. And there's so much scope for doing a lot more work there. And I can anticipate that Gordon Noble on Monday will highlight the potential to find a similar site to Burkhead in the Highlands. It must exist somewhere. And I hope that his talk is going to give us insights on where to look. So altogether, I hope you'll agree it's been a wide-ranging and a fascinating festival, highlighting this current work and areas that are ripe for future work, and also will feed into these research questions for ScARF. I'll end with a personal reflection that the HAF conferences have been essential for my work on the Highland Regional ScARF. Without these talks, it would be difficult to know about the exciting work that's happening in Highland by independent researchers, by academics, students, commercial units, museums, and community groups. And long may it continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. That was excellent, wrapping up what we've seen so far in the festival. Now, if everyone just thought you were just sitting here at night after night being entertained, you were wrong, because what we're doing is getting you a whole lot of work that you're going to have to go back and answer with these research questions. How best can we get more out of everything that we've learned so far? So if anyone has any specific questions for Susan just now, then please ask them. If you want to feedback more directly, and you can go to the website. And Susan, the maps and the draft chapters are there on the ScARF website, are they?
No, they're on the ARCH website.
Okay,
they're on the ARCH website at the moment, yes.
I've put the link in the chat there. If you want to go and have a look, you'll be able to see everything there. Tell us where it's wrong, where you can add detail. If you have some of the books that haven't been accessed yet, then please join in there, because it's painting a really important picture of everything that we know about Highlands so far. It's an absolutely massive job, and I'm sure Susan could do with everyone else's knowledge as well. It's very welcome. It's part of the project, and we want your opinions as well. So any specific, oh, here we go. We've got a question for you, Susan. It's from Nick Lindsay. He says, what other examples are you looking for?
I think by other examples here, I'm meaning case studies. Merrill has done a number of these already for us, and we're then taking advantage of a lot of the research that NOSAS has done. I can think of a number, Nick, that you've been involved with, a case study of your inn. How many inns have been in the Highlands? It's basically examples that can flesh out some of the story. Obviously hard to do if you haven't seen the base of the chapter to know how it would work in, but often a case study will then feed into the chapters that's being written as well. Looking for ones that are about 1 page long. It's not absolutely rigorous on that, but the key is, why is whatever case study you're writing, whatever the example you're doing, why is that important for knowing about Highland archaeology and heritage? Hopefully that answers your question, Nick.
I hope it did, yes. So case studies are going to form a large part of this project, isn't that right, Susan? So
yes, they're already, I would guess that there's about 30 of them already up, and you can read the case studies. They're all up, I should say, most of them are up, but we're always open to more to be coming.
Perfect. So again, go and read them, see what we've missed out, and please feel free to add your own. Don't hold back, don't be shy, because it's all your heritage as well. So we really want to hear from you so that Susan can paint the best picture she possibly can from this whole project. Now, do we have any other? Oh, we've got Nick Lindsay is going to email you, Susan, so that's a positive. You can expect that. Any other questions just now, or are we going to wrap up tonight? I can't see any hands raised. But again, we have, moving on now, I'm going to say thank you to Susan.